The first time Elijah Moore walked into the mirror room, he thought he'd finally arrived. A high-rise conference chamber walled with glass on three sides, sunlight bleeding in from the downtown skyline, and a long black glass table so polished you could see your own reflection, hence the name. It wasn't meant for people like him, not really. The room had been designed for power, by power, to reflect power. Blackness wasn't in the blueprint, not in the chairs, not in the voices, not in the future they were building. But today, Elijah stood there, tall, proud, and prepared. Dressed in a slate gray tailored suit, black shirt underneath, no tie. His style was deliberate, confident, never flashy. His portfolio was slim, but weighty with meaning. He laid it down on the table with care, not desperation. It carried the product of 6 years of obsession, 30 community meetings, a decade of being overlooked, and a lifetime of being told you don't look like an architect. The firm was called Lyricon, but nobody ever said the name aloud without softening their voice. It was one of those legacy firms where money moved in whispers and decisions were made behind closed elevators. Elijah wasn't just the only black man in the room, he was the only black man who had made it past the break room, past the internship graveyard, past the safe zone token rolls. He cleared his throat. 10 men sat across from him, 8 white to black, only one of them met his eye. The rest scrolled on tablets, pretended to study the projected 3D models behind him, or stirred coffee with more interest than they gave his words. "Gentlemen," Elijah began, his voice steady, calm, laced with restrained heat. "This is Horizon 88. It's not just a housing development, it's a vision, a community blueprint, one built with dignity, functionality, and sustainability at the core." He tapped the tablet, and the visuals rotated on the screen. Smooth curved rooftops, modular eco-pods for families, elevated gardens flowing between buildings, and child-friendly play areas built from recycled wood and water capture systems. Nothing about it screamed luxury, but everything whispered home. "I've spent 6 years developing this," Elijah continued. "I've worked with civil engineers, urban historians, behavioral psychologists, and most importantly, with the people who will live here. This isn't some fantasy. It's fully backed by economic models. We can deliver at 15% under traditional public housing cost if we skip the concrete coffin approach." He looked up. Silence. Then Vincent Harrow's CEO leaned forward. "How? Do you plan to sell the city council on this?" "With truth," Elijah said, evenly, "and with results." Harrow smirked like a man amused at someone who still believed in Santa Claus. "Very poetic," said James Whitlow, another senior exec. "But we're in the business of building, and this, while noble, is risky." "Risky to who?" Elijah asked. "To families who've lived in rat-infested towers for decades, or to the wallets that fund status quo cement blocks." A silence fell. Sharp, cutting. Harrow stared at him. "We'll review." "Thank you, Elijah." He knew what that meant. Review was just the polite corporate term for bury. He nodded once, gathered his designs, and walked out with dignity and tact, but something in his chest already cracking. Back at his desk, tucked in the far corner of the 22nd floor, Elijah sat down. His office had no window, no view. Just a pinboard of drafts and a photo of his late father, the man who taught him how to sketch rooftops, using chalk on a cracked sidewalk in South Memphis. He stared at that photo now. He whispered to it, "I gave them gold, Pops," and they saw dirt. Later that night, in a mostly empty train car heading home, Elijah sat alone. He pulled out his phone and opened the voice recorder app. "If you're hearing this, it means they did it again. Took the vision, painted over the color, buried the name. They erased me, but I was here, and this recording is the proof." He paused. "I won't fight them. Not the way they expect, but I'll speak, even if I whisper." He saved the file, titled it, erased_proof01. The next morning his designs were gone from the server, not archived, not moved. Gone. Elijah asked it. They shrugged. "You sure? You uploaded it, right?" He asked HR. They said it was internal transfer day. He went to the files room, denied access, but that evening, a press release from Lyricon announced their groundbreaking Skyrise Unity project. James Whitlow name was on the header, and the design, a butchered version of Elijah's Horizon 88, stripped of soul, repainted in sterile white walls and polished steel, but undeniably his dot, his fingerprints, their credit. No mention of Elijah. At home, he stared at the news story in silence. His hands didn't shake, he didn't cry. He just sat back and looked up at the ceiling, where sunlight once used to leak in like hope. Now it was just plaster. Dry, old, and silent. The apartment was filled with stacked blueprints. Some old, some torn, some burned in anger. He picked up one, his first drawing of Horizon 88, complete with handwritten notes in the margins. He folded it carefully, as if folding up a piece of himself. Then, suddenly, his phone vibrated. A message. From a name he didn't recognize. "I saw what they did. I saved everything." He blinked. Another message. "You don't know me, but I was the intern. I backed up your project on a personal drive. I heard what they said in the mirror room. I recorded it too." Elijah stared. The seed of something stirred in his chest. Not hope. Not yet. But a flicker. Something survived. and somewhere, someone still saw him. When Elijah Moore walked through the firm's front doors the next morning, the glass didn't shine like before. It felt like a mirror, still, but now it showed him fading. His badge didn't scan on the first try. No one at reception looked up. The warmth that once greeted him, fake as it might have been, was gone. In its place, silence. Silence that stuck to the walls like dried paint. He didn't speak, just walked the corridor he once walked with pride, past design awards he never won, past project photos he'd once contributed to, past the interns he used to mentor who now averted their eyes like he was contagious. When he reached his office, or what used to be the nameplate was gone, the door was locked. "Excuse me," he said softly to the assistant across the hall. She glanced up, guilt in her eyes. "You've been moved to Flex Workspace, B, 4th floor. He blinked, once said nothing, just nodded. Flex B wasn't even an office. It was a shared desk area meant for freelancers, part-timers, and contractors. It smelled like cold coffee and recycled air. The lights flickered. Elijah sat down at a plastic chair, opened his laptop, and stared at the blank screen. All his files were gone, every single one. He reached for the flash drive in his pocket, the one he'd always used as backup, plugged it in, wiped clean. He opened his email. There it was. Subject: change in project roles from HR body, effective immediately. Your involvement with internal housing development has been transitioned. You will be reassigned to municipal compliance and safety audits. That's how they do it. Not with guns, not with fire, but with quiet emails. With airless rooms, with your name slowly scraped off things. He sat back in the plastic chair and stared at the ceiling and whispered to no one. So this is how they erase you. Across the city, in a tiny studio apartment filled with flickering monitors and noodle cups, a 22-year-old intern named Kiana Webb sat cross-legged on her mattress, earbuds in, fingers flying across a keyboard. She replayed the recording she'd secretly taken in the mirror room. "We let him present. That's enough. No one's going to notice the difference if Whitlow takes the lead. He's good. But we don't need another Malcolm X in the lobby." She paused the file, her face twisted in disbelief. She had admired Elijah, the only one who'd ever treated her like a real thinker, not just a black girl good at software. He once bought her lunch after a stressful day and said, "You belong here, Kiana. Don't ever let this building tell you otherwise." Now they were burying him, scrubbing him like chalk. She opened a hidden folder and clicked on the blueprint file she had secretly copied from the network the night before. It was deleted. Horizon_88_final.vpx. It glowed in color on her screen, his signature in the bottom right corner. They had no idea she had it, not yet. Meanwhile, Elijah spent the rest of the day watching his name disappear. He checked the internal database. Horizon 88 was no longer listed under his portfolio. His access to project forums had been revoked. A new project, Skyrise Unity, was now on every screen in the building. Press packets, promotional reels, names of sponsors, photos of Whitlow shaking hands with city leaders. He was nowhere. In the lunchroom, people whispered around him, a few avoided eye contact. One man, Jackson, a white junior designer, walked up and said quietly, "I'm sorry, Elijah, I didn't know they'd do you like this." Elijah looked up slowly, "But you knew they could." Jackson said nothing, just nodded, and left. That evening, Elijah walked the empty streets of downtown. The sounds of traffic blurred into a soft hum behind his thoughts. His reflection followed. Him in every store window stretched ghost they'd forgotten. He found himself sitting at a public bench near a construction site. A billboard behind him read, "Skyrise Unity, the future of living." The photo on it. His design cheapened. His roof curvature now steel instead of green dot. His garden paths replaced with lifeless concrete walkways. His entire soul, now, a hollow brand. He sat there for hours, then pulled out his phone again. They took the blueprints, but they couldn't take the breath. Horizon was never just lines. It was roots, it was dignity. I spoke, and they silenced me. But the truth doesn't die. He saved the file, erased_proof 02. Later that night, his inbox lit up. Subject: found you from kweb91@protonmail.com. Body: I have the original plans. I have the recording. I'm scared, but I can't sit quiet. We need to meet. Elijah stared at the screen. For the first time in days, something inside him shifted. Someone had seen him. Someone still believed he mattered. The next morning, they met at a public library, 3rd floor, corner study room. Kiana wore a blue hoodie and carried a backpack full of hard drives. She looked nervous. Elijah wore a long black coat, his eyes heavy with grief and alertness. She slid the flash drive across the table. I kept it. I don't even know why. Maybe because I knew this would happen. Elijah picked it up slowly. "You just risked your career," he said. Kiana shrugged. "I didn't come to survive Lurkan. I came to build something real, like you did." He smiled, not with his lips, but with his eyes. A small flame relit. They spent 3 hours reviewing files, voice memos, time-stamped drafts, recorded Zoom calls, meeting logs, proof. All of it. And then Kiana asked the question neither wanted to say aloud. What now? That night, Elijah went home and opened a private blog he'd once started and abandoned. He renamed it The Black Blueprint. Stories they buried and uploaded the first entry. My name is Elijah Moore. I designed Horizon 88. I gave it everything I had. They took it, repainted it, then tried to erase me. This is my story. Underneath, he attached screenshots of the original blueprints, signed designs, and a short voice clip. Within 24 hours, it had 12,000 views. By the end of the week, 140,000. The voice they tried to silence had just begun to rise. The first crane rose into the skyline like a lie being built from steel. The foundation of Skyrise Unity began just 2 months after Elijah Moore was removed from his own project. Bulldozers rolled across land that once held a community center. The media called it revitalization. The city officials smiled for photos. And standing in the middle of it all was James Whitlow, white hard hat, branded jacket, holding a shovel that still had Elijah's fingerprints on it. But Elijah wasn't there, not on the ground, not in the articles, not in the press kit, and certainly not in the blueprints they now showed the world. Stripped, soulless, corporate. He watched it all unfold from the screen of a cafe. Hood up, hat low, coffee cold. The barista didn't know his name, neither did the news anchor. But the building, behind them, every corner of it whispered his design. The rooftop solar garden, the curved balconies to prevent wind drag, the underground rain filtration system, his idea. He knew that structure better than his own reflection, and yet, his name had never touched it. Elijah didn't go home that night. He walked for hours, through neighborhoods still holding on brick, buildings with chipped paint, stoops with elders and folding chairs, murals of Malcolm and Maya peeling off alley walls. The places Horizon 88 was meant to protect. He passed a small group of teenagers gathered under a flickering streetlight. One of them had a drawing pad on his lap, scribbling wild lines with charcoal fingers. Elijah stopped. You draw? The boy looked up cautious. Kinda. Elijah knelt. Show me. The kid flipped a page, raw, rough sketches of rooftops, windows, balconies that curved like breath. You ever heard of passive solar airflow? Elijah asked. The kid shook his head. Elijah smiled. You just designed it without even knowing. For a moment, that boy saw something no one else ever gave him recognition. Elijah walked away in silence. But the boy's face stayed in his memory like wet ink on a clean page. Across town, Kiana sat in her apartment, uploading the third blog entry. The series had exploded. The comments flooded in from teachers, architects, activists, everyday folks. I worked under Elijah. They stole everything. We need to rally behind this man. How many black creators have they buried this way? But with each post, came threats to anonymous emails. A message that read, stop or disappear. Another said, nobody believes you. Delete the files. Kiana didn't flinch, but she did close her curtains that night, double-locked the door, and slept with her laptop under her arm like a diary full of proof. By the end of the week, a small local news station asked Elijah for an interview. He declined, but then they aired a segment anyway, titled, The Ghost Behind the Glass. The Real Architect of Skyrise Unity. It featured Kiana's anonymous blog. The story went viral. Lyricon denied everything. They claimed the ideas were collaborative, that Elijah was never removed, just reassigned. They even included a pixelated photo of him at a company barbecue, the only one they could find. The world watched, but Elijah stayed silent until one day he stood outside the construction zone. The building now reached 7 stories high, and he saw it for the first time in person. His building, but twisted. The garden deck had been replaced with a corporate logo. The community playground, scrapped for extra parking. He stood on the sidewalk, staring upward like a man attending his own funeral. A construction worker walked past him. You lost, man? Elijah shook his head. No, he whispered, just erased. Later that night, Elijah returned home and sat with Kiana across a small dinner table. They ate in silence, until he asked, what happens when the truth isn't enough? Kiana leaned forward. Then we shout it, until silence cracks. He looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled not from joy, but from recognition. Like 2 survivors realizing they weren't the last ones breathing. Then he said, it's time. She knew what he meant. They didn't just want to speak, they wanted to show. The next morning a video went live. Elijah Moore, face visible, voice calm, no music, no edit. They say I was a team member. I was the architect. They say it was collaborative. I built it from scratch. They said I was angry. I was right. He held up his original blueprint, signed, dated, stamped, then, side by side, showed Skyrise Unity's design. Identical, the final words. If they can do this to me, how many others did they erase who never got to speak? In the first 12 hours, it reached 1 million views. Back at the construction site, James Whitlow stood on a scaffold giving a press tour when a voice shouted from below. Elijah Moore built this. Then another. Then 10 more. Students, architects, local leaders, people who'd read the blog, who'd seen the video. They weren't protesting, not yet. They were remembering, because Elijah's voice was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone, who had been silenced and buried and painted. They came quietly at first. teachers, young students. A grandmother who still remembered Elijah's face from a town hall meeting 5 years back. The video had cracked something, not just attention, memory of what had been promised. Memory of who had made those promises, and memory of how the promise had been stolen in silence. But the spark that turned memory into movement didn't come from a politician, or an activist, or even Elijah himself. It came from a girl, 8 years old, black-skinned, bright eyes, pink shoes, and the kind of questions adults had long stopped asking. Her name was Mila Carter, and she stood at the gates of the skyrise construction site with her mother, holding a sign made from a cereal box. On it was scribbled in crayon, "Why did you steal Mr. Elijah's building?" No hashtags, no slogans. Just one question, the kind that grown men in suits couldn't answer without stuttering. A reporter noticed that then too, then a swarm of cameras. The footage of Mila gripping her mother's hand, asking the question again in a soft voice, spread faster than any press release ever could. If he made it, why don't they say his name? Inside a downtown boardroom, chaos broke out. Lyricon executives pounded tables, flung folders, whispered legal threats. They had survived blog posts. They had survived whistleblowers, but this was a child. No PR firm had the antidote for innocence. Elijah watched the footage on Kiana's cracked tablet. He didn't smile. He wept silently because even in a city that had tried to bury him, there were children brave enough to dig him out with nothing but cardboard and crayons. He whispered, "They can't erase her." Kiana put her hand on his. "They can't erase you either." That week, the mayor called a press conference. Tense. Stage. He stood before a podium with the Lyricon CEO at his side and said, "We believe in inclusivity, and we regret any misunderstandings surrounding this Unity project. We will be issuing a formal statement." He was cut off, because standing in the back row, camera phone steady, was Mila's mother, and Mila holding a new sign. This one said, "Why won't you say his name?" The room shifted. Reporters turned. The mayor hesitated just long enough for the lie to lose its legs. That night, Elijah received an invitation to a university architecture panel. The theme, authorship, race, and recognition in urban development. He went not for prestige, not for redemption, but to speak. His panel slot was short, 15 minutes. But when he stood at the lectern and pulled out the original Horizon 88 sketches, yellowed, marked by time and fingerprints, the room fell silent. "I didn't come to reclaim my building. I came to reclaim my voice. Because if my silence helped build something, then maybe my truth can tear something down." The applause didn't erupt. It didn't need to. It rose slowly, steadily, like the weight of justice shifting. Back in her apartment, Kiana received a message from Mila's mother. A drawing. Mila had sketched Elijah standing tall in front of the building. This time, his name was carved into the concrete wall behind him. Kiana printed it out, framed it, and hung it beside Elijah's desk. The only portrait in his studio. That wasn't of architecture but of a future imagined by a child. But Lyra wasn't done. They pivoted, announced a community panel, invited Elijah to collaborate. It was never about inclusion. It was about optics. Elijah declined. Instead, he took a different route. One the city never saw coming. He began working with a coalition of displaced families from the original Horizon 88 site. Together, they drafted a counterplan for a new space, not tied to Lyricon, not tied to politics, but rooted in people. They called it Memory Square. A space to remember, a place to begin again, and Mila. She became the youngest voice at their first forum. She walked to the mic, adjusted it nervously, and said, "I don't know much about buildings, but I know people should tell the truth. And I think Elijah told the truth." She sat down. The room stood up. And in that moment, one voice became many. There's a moment, quiet and bitter, that comes not when they take something from you, but when they offer it back. Elijah sat alone in his apartment that morning, sunlight crawling slowly across the floor like a truth too shy to speak. His hands were calloused from sketching, not with pencils, with pressure. The kind that builds under silence. The kind that hardens you from the inside out. The invitation lay unopened on the table. Lyricon's Public Unity Council had extended a formal seat to him, not just a seat, a title. Senior Cultural Advisor to Skyrise Unity, and there it was. Not justice, not an apology, just another drawer, offered to him, politely. So he could climb in, be filed away, and closed. Elijah didn't reply. He walked to the drawer that mattered. A wooden one. Old shipped, almost shy in how it creaked open. Inside it sat something untouched for 5 years. A letter. Folded, written in his mother's hand before she passed. He had never opened it, not because he forgot, but because he knew. Deep down, he knew it would ask something from him, and he wasn't ready to give it. But today, he was. He opened it. "Elijah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. Or you're finally strong enough to face the reason I wrote this. Son, they'll try to cut your voice out of the blueprints. Not because you're wrong, but because your truth is louder than their lies. Don't let bitterness harden you. Build something no one can take, a legacy, not just a building. And if they erase you, make sure the world still remembers where to find the outline. I'm proud of you, not because you're brilliant, I'm proud because you kept showing up. Mama, the next day, Elijah showed up, but not at the Lyricon event. He went to a worn-down community center on the south end, where elders sat in plastic chairs and shared stories over cold coffee and old jazz records. The place where his mother once read books to children, where the first sketch of Horizon 88 had been drawn on the back of a voting flyer. He walked in, placed the Lyricon invitation on the table and said, "I'd rather rebuild this center than sit at their table." Word spread. Volunteers came. A documentary filmmaker reached out. Architectural students offered free labor, and slowly, Memory Square became real. Not in blueprints, but in brick, glass, and blood. It wasn't about scale, it was about truth. One night, Kiana found Elijah asleep at the drafting table, the letter from his mother resting under his hand. She didn't move it. She just placed a second pillow behind his neck and whispered, "They can't invite you into a future that's already yours." Meanwhile, Lyricon moved fast. They launched ads featuring a racially diverse cast of actors. They created a scholarship in someone else's name. They painted over the cracks with budget, branding, and buzzwords. But nothing landed, because now, Elijah had something stronger than revenge. He had receipts. The letter, the blueprints, the video, and most dangerously, of all the people, he published an open letter in the city paper. No bitterness, just facts, time-stamped, image-backed, gentle, and surgical. It didn't attack. It revealed. And sometimes that's worse, because it left Lyricon nowhere to hide. 2 weeks later, Mila's mother called. She asked me what integrity meant. I said your name. That weekend, Elijah held a soft launch for Memory Square. No press, no ribbon, just music, food, faces, Kendrick's grandma, Mila's father, a retired bricklayer who remembered Elijah's first build, students who only knew him as the man in the article. All of them came. One woman brought a gift, a framed copy of his mother's letter scanned, restored, and mounted on polished wood. "She built you," the woman said. "Now you're building us." By the end of the evening, Elijah sat under the string lights outside, sketching again. Not a building, not a skyline. He drew a mirror, one that reflected back every single person they tried to erase. The storm never announces itself. It waits, patient and invisible behind glass walls and perfect smiles. And when it returns, it doesn't raise its voice. It sits quietly in the back row, just like he used to. His name was Nico Ose. He had once been the intern. No one noticed the shadow who brought coffee, took notes, and stayed invisible inside Lyricon's steel towers. But Elijah had remembered him, always. Because while the others saw a ghost, Elijah had seen a mirror. Back then, Nico had watched everything, including Elijah's erasure. And now, after years away, he was back. But not for coffee. Memory Square had taken on a life of its own. What began as a neighborhood project had bloomed into a quiet revolution. Every weekend, it hosted free architecture workshops, community dialogue nights, and youth sketching corners under warm lights. It was a living space, not just a structure, one born from a wound that refused to scab over. Elijah was building more than brick and purpose. He was building an archive, but the city had other plans. On a Thursday morning, Elijah got the letter. "We regret to inform you that the city's Development Integrity Board has suspended the urban renewal grants attached to your project pending a compliance review." He read it twice. Then once more he knew the tone, not direct, not honest, just dressed in paperwork. Someone wanted him slowed down, not because he failed, but because he succeeded without permission. And that's when Nico walked in. Now, 27. Taller glasses, braids tied back. He still didn't talk much, but his silence wasn't submission anymore. It was strategy. "I never stopped recording," he said, laying a flash drive on the table. Elijah stared. "Every meeting, every memo, every change to the blueprints. I archived it all, even the ones they wiped." Elijah blinked, stunned. "You were watching?" "No, I was studying. You taught me what survival looked like." The files weren't just useful, they were damning. Emails between Lyricon board members mocking Elijah's tone. Internal edits replacing his name with corporate pseudonyms. Rewrites of project credits just weeks before public announcements. But most powerful was a voice memo. One of the senior partners at Lyricon, unaware his mic was live. "Let the kid design, but we'll slap our name on it when it's time. We don't need another Malcolm and Marble." Elijah listened, then exhaled, What happened next wasn't revenge, it was clarity. Nico and Elijah built a digital archive, not for the courts, not for the media, but for the public. Every document was dated, verified, contextualized. Then, quietly, they sent it to every architecture student in the state, and then waited. What followed wasn't fire, it was flood. Students began citing Elijah in thesis work. Young black interns reached out with stories of ERASURE. An Ivy League university launched a speaker series titled Ghost to Genius, The Architecture of Silence, with Elijah as the keynote. And Lyricon, their office windows shattered, not from bricks, but from truth. They issued a statement. "We are shocked and saddened to learn of archival discrepancies. "We are committed to equity, and we will conduct a full internal review." But no one believed them, because this time, Nico was no longer invisible. He stood beside Elijah in interviews, on panels, in photos, and every time he spoke, his voice didn't shake. One day, Elijah asked him, "Why now? Why come back?" Nico paused, then smiled. "Because I needed to see if the world you imagined could exist." That weekend, Memory Square unveiled a new room. The archive room. Inside were not just Elijah's designs, but the recordings, transcripts, erased names, and letters from others like him. A quiet museum of voices once buried, a proof of presence, a warning to systems. A gift to the future. On the wall above the door, engraved into the wood, were 6 simple words they tried to erase. "We recorded," and in the middle of the room stood Nico, quiet, composed, holding a Polaroid. It was a picture of 24-year-old Elijah, laughing with a pencil behind his ear, blueprint half-finished beside him, unaware the moment was being captured. He was black. He was right. He was erased. But not anymore. The news didn't break. It rippled quiet at first, like the gentle hum of a voice returning after silence. Across the city, old voices began to echo again. In classrooms, in union halls, in courtrooms where Elijah's name had once been whispered, like a warning. Now it rang like a bell. But justice never arrives neatly. It crashes in waves. Memory Square had grown. What started as a single reclaimed block was now a full district blueprint, voted for by the people, funded by independent donors, and protected by a legal trust. The city tried once more to halt it. They sent lawyers, petitions, auditors, and when all that failed, they tried to discredit Elijah publicly. Again, but this time they weren't fighting just one man, they were fighting the echo. At the center of this final wave stood Elijah, older now, scarred but unbowed. His voice wasn't louder, it was deeper, firmer. It carried the weight of every silence he had once endured, and behind him stood Nico. Beside him stood Clara, the community lawyer who had once quit in protest. On his left, Malik, the teen who had once spray-painted his name on a forgotten brick wall. And in the back, in rows and rows, stood hundreds, students, elders, builders, teachers. He no longer spoke for the people. He spoke with them. The final showdown came not with sirens, but subpoenas. Elijah was called to testify before a special commission hastily formed to investigate civic misappropriation of intellectual capital, a fancy way to say, "We need to erase you again." But this time, he brought receipts. Inside the marble hearing room, Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He just opened a black folder, laid out photographs, audio logs, and one single page of handwritten notes. "These are your signatures," he said calmly, passing them across the table. "This is my design." And that he nodded toward the back of the room is the community that built it. Silenced not from fear, but from realization. They had lost the thread. He had written a new one. Outside the hearing, news crews waited. But Elijah didn't stay for the cameras. He walked back to Memory Square, not to celebrate but to plant a tree. Placed it near the center of the square, an oak, chosen by the children who now learned design in the same hall where his name had once been erased. "Will it grow fast?" a little girl asked, holding a watering can. Elijah smiled. "Not fast," he said, "but strong." Weeks passed. The commission crumbled under public pressure. Lyricon dissolved 3 of its top contracts. Whistleblowers came forward, citing years of buried contributions from black and brown interns. But Elijah didn't gloat. He didn't post. He just kept building. One day, a letter arrived from the National Society of Urban Architects. "Dear Mr. Elijah Keene, we would be honored to posthumously reissue the award your designs once earned, now under your name, and no one else's. We apologize for the decades it took." Elijah read the letter, then folded it, and placed it in the archive room, under glass next to a photograph of his younger self, smiling with blueprints in his hands. He didn't need the award anymore. He had the echo. The story spread beyond the city. Universities redesigned their mentorship programs. Black architectural collectives formed across the country, and in neighborhoods that once felt unseen, murals of Elijah and Nico began appearing, not as saints or martyrs, but as men who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. In the final scene, Elijah stood on the balcony of the new community design institute built entirely from local material and vision. He looked out at the skyline, where once stood glass towers that erased him. Now rose centers inspired by his first sketches. Even those who had tried to silence him now mimicked his style. But Elijah didn't feel bitter. He felt whole. He closed his eyes, breathed in, and whispered, "He was black. He was right. They tried to erase him. But look what grew from the silence." In a quiet corner of the institute, Nico sat with a group of students. "Was Elijah your teacher?" one of them asked. Nico shook his head gently. "No, he was the proof that we've always known how to build. They just hid the blueprints." And on the wall behind them, above, a new door that led into the design lab, 6 final words had been carved. "We were never silent, just unheard."